There's a generation that doesn't really have a name. Too small to make it into textbooks, too important to ignore. They were born roughly between 1976 and 1985, and they ended up standing right on the edge of two completely different worlds. They're called Xennials, a micro-generation raised with one foot in analog life, and the other stepping straight into the digital age. Picture this. It's 1987. You're 12 years old. After school, you go to a friend's house. No texting, no calling ahead. You just show up, ring the doorbell, walk into the yard. That was normal. At night, you watch TV on a schedule. Miss an episode? That's it. No replay, no streaming, no watch it later. Life moved in real time. No pause, no rewind. Then fast forward 10 years. You're in college, and for the first time, you hear the sound of a dial-up modem. You send your first email, you do your first internet search, and it feels like the world just changed while you were watching it happen. Xennials are the only generation that remembers both worlds, before the internet and after the internet. Analog childhood, digital adulthood. And this isn't just nostalgia. Psychologists describe it as a dual reference frame. When you've lived through two completely different versions of reality, neither one feels like the only way things can be. You can see both, and more importantly, you can switch between them. That's why Xennials aren't afraid of technology, but they're not dependent on it either. They can go offline for a weekend without spiraling. They can call instead of text, and text instead of call, without thinking about it. They're bilingual in the deepest sense, analog and digital. Their childhood was also a very specific moment in history. The Cold War was ending. The old world was still standing, but cracking. Parents still believed in stability, even as it quietly started to disappear. That shaped something important, a kind of cautious optimism. They believe things will work out, but they always double-check. Always have a backup plan. Not pessimism, just realism, with hope still attached. Then came their teenage years, and they watched the rules of adulthood start to break. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Berlin Wall fell. Economic stability stopped being guaranteed. Get a degree, get a job, stay safe. Suddenly didn't sound so solid anymore. But here's the key difference. They didn't experience it inside the chaos in real time, the way later generations would. They watched it unfold through news, conversations, books. There was distance, and that distance gave them perspective. The world is unstable, but still livable. Then came the internet, and this is where Xennials split from everyone else. Millennials grew up with the internet as a default. For them, it's like air, always there. Xennials didn't. They entered it later, as already formed adults, which means they never fully disappeared into it. They adapted to it, and that makes them flexible in a rare way. They can function in both worlds. They understand older colleagues who distrust technology and younger ones who can't imagine life without it. They translate between eras. But there's another side to this. Xennials often don't fully belong anywhere. Too young for Gen X, too old for Millennials. Always slightly in between categories. And that creates a quiet pressure to prove themselves, to over-deliver, to never really stop. Because somewhere deep down is a feeling of being slightly out of place everywhere. But that in-between space is also their advantage. They don't see the world in binary terms, old versus new, digital versus human, online versus offline. They see both at once. And in a world obsessed with choosing sides, that's a rare skill. Every generation gets a metaphor. Boomers built the bridge. Gen X became the bridge. Millennials walked across it. Xennials? They stood right in the middle of it. At the exact moment when one side was still visible and the other was just beginning to appear through the fog. Not lost, not stuck, just positioned between two versions of reality. And maybe that's the point, because in between isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's the only place where you can actually see the full picture.